All right. Let's dive into God's Word today. We're going to talk about Hebrews 12, but before we get into that, last week Tony spoke to us from Hebrews 11, that great chapter about faith, and I want to, before we get into Hebrews 12, I want to go back to actually the end of Hebrews 10 and pick up a thread that's there, and goes through 11 and into 12, kind of a callback. You'll see how this works, but it'll draw it all together. So, with that said, here it is, Hebrews 10 and into 11. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has great reward. For you have need of endurance, in order that after you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet a very little while, and the one who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul is not well pleased with him. But we are not among those who shrink back to destruction, but among those who have faith to the preservation of our souls. Now faith is the realization of what is hoped for and the proof of things not seen. For by this the people of old were approved. He says in verse 35 and 36 some key things here that draw through 11 and into 12. He talks about not throwing away our confidence because it has great reward. There's something that we can be confident and assured of, and there's a great reward with it. And we shouldn't set that aside lightly. We shouldn't do things that throw that away. And he tells them, you have need of endurance. That's the heart of his message for the people that he's speaking to. They need endurance. They're in tough situations and they need endurance. And he warns them that there is something that they're going to receive. They're going to receive what was promised, but you need to endure and you need to do God's will first. And then he says, he says to his hearers, you're not among those who shrink back, but you're the ones that have faith. And he goes into this long chapter of we call it heroes of the faith, although as Tony talked about last week, it kind of might make us think that you have to be a hero to have faith. It's the other way around. Ordinary people had faith, and that's what made them into God's heroes. So, in chapter 11, he lists a long list of examples, but there's a pattern, as Tony talked about. There's a pattern where he says by faith, and then the name of some person, and then what they did, and then most of the time he talks about an outcome, sometimes not. But that's the pattern throughout that whole chapter. By faith, so-and-so did this, and this happened. By faith, so-and-so did this. By faith, so-and-so did that. And we can see from that, even though we like to say verse 1 is a definition of faith, we see that by his examples, he's defining what faith does. Faith involves some response to what God has said. And in fact, in his commentary on Hebrews, George Guthrie has this kind of working definition that he got from the examples. Like, according to these examples of faith, this is what faith is. It's confidence that results in an action. And it might be carried out in a variety of situations by ordinary people, but it's in response to an unseen God and his promises. That's the key. An action that is in response to an unseen God and his promises. And there's various earthly outcomes, but always, not always good earthly outcomes, but always the ultimate outcome is God's approval or commendation and his reward. Remember, we just read at Hebrews 11, or Hebrews 10, that last bit, your confidence has great reward. And that after you've done the will of God, you'll receive what was promised. He starts giving a whole bunch of examples of what that is. And he ends with this great crescendo about these people that by faith conquered kingdoms and performed acts of righteousness and obtained promises and quenched the power of fire and escaped the edge of the sword and led armies into battle. He said they received back their dead by resurrection. But then he flips it and says, but some were tortured, refusing to accept being released because they were looking for a better resurrection. And they were mocked and they were scourged. That means beaten. And they went around in rustic clothing and no homes, living in caves and holes. These people that the world wasn't worthy of them. And then, with that backdrop, ending in that great crescendo of all these people that he didn't have time to talk about, but they all shared these things in common, that they received great promises and others endured great hardships, but they all saw something. It was all actions in response to the promises of an unseen God. And with that in your head, then he says, therefore, since we also have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, putting aside every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us, let us run with patient endurance the race that has been set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The great cloud of witnesses, that's who he's talking about. All those people. It kind of, with this race metaphor, it kind of evokes like a whole bunch of people in some stands, right? A cloud of witnesses surrounding us, and let's run this race. It kind of, I don't know about you, it makes me think of like a stadium, right? And all these people in the stands, and that's the witnesses, and we talk about it in those terms a lot, like they're cheering us on, right? These people that have gone before us, that we're just the latest in a long line of people of faith, and that's all well and good, but the author of Hebrews actually intends a little bit more with this whole witness thing. They're not bearing witness to the race we're running. That's not what these witnesses are. They're bearing witness to the faithfulness of God. And that word witness is a callback to two. There's bookends at the end and beginning of Hebrews 11. At the beginning in Hebrews 11:2, it says that by faith the people of old were approved. And then at the end, it says that all these having received approval through their faith. So he has this approved word, and you're saying, well, that's not the same word as witness. It is in the Greek. It's not the same exact word. It's a related word. So think of it this way. In English, we have a different word for it, approved versus witness. But to receive approval, in the Greek, the way you say it is you receive someone's witness, right? What is witnessing? You see something, and you say something about it. You see this is good, and you say that's good. Or you see this is bad, and you say that's bad. Right? You say what you saw. That's what witnessing is. And so when we receive God's approval, the way they say that in the Greek is you're receiving his witness. God's saying, yeah, I see this in you. And this, I'm calling it that. And so all these witnesses received God's witness for their faith, but they're also bearing witness to God's faithfulness. That's what that whole chapter is about. They're also making a testimony. They're also saying, God is faithful. I did this in my life. I took this action in response to the promises of an unseen God, and he was faithful. Whether I went through this hardship or not, in the end, he was faithful. And so this great cloud of witnesses are bearing witness to the faithfulness of God. So it's not so much that they look on as we run this race, but it's more like we look at them for encouragement, for examples, this great cloud of witnesses. And so he says, okay, since we have all these examples to look at, all these people that have gone before us, that have shown us what God is like, how he responds to confident actions based on his words. Since we have that going for us, let us run. In the Greek, as it is in this version that I'm using, it's all one sentence. And for you grammar nerds out there, the action verb here is let us run. Everything else is kind of saying how we run, or why we run, or what we do while we run. It's all supporting that. The main thing is we have this cloud of witnesses, therefore, let us run. He says first that we should put aside something. Every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares. Weight, that word is it means weight, like literally, like something heavy, a burden. It could mean like fat, like you lost some weight, or a mass, or a burden. Something that would keep you from running, or make it hard for you to run. Throw that off. Put that aside. And then the sin that so easily ensnares, entangles, say some other versions. It's actually, believe it or not, the only place that Greek word is used that we have any record of, whether in the Bible or in secular Greek. It's the only place. Any other time it's used in Greek, or we're all written after and written about this verse. So it is something you got to kind of figure out from the context. But because of its origins and all that, we have a decent idea of what it means, and it is something that would maybe cling so closely that it hinders your movements. So that's where the ideas, the translations of ensnaring or entangling come from, right? It's something that kind of sets on you, like imagine a weighted net or something that is just constricting your movement. These are things that you can't run well when you have this on you. So we have to put aside the weight and the sin that so easily ensnares, that clings so closely. And then what else do we need to do as we run? We need to have patient endurance. Remember at the end of chapter 10, he said, you have need of endurance. This is a callback to that. You have need of endurance. And he brings it up again. Let us run with patient endurance. And then he spends the most time talking about this last thing. We got to fix our eyes on Jesus as we run. That's like the pack leader. If you ever watch track, the lead group, that's who you're trying to keep up with or catch up to. Only in Jesus' case, he's already finished the race. But he's shown that example for us. And so that's who we have to look at, he says. And he says some things about him. He says that he's the originator. This word is variously translated. There's translations that say founder or a pioneer. Is what the NIV says. He's author is what the old like King James and New King James says. But it's all that same idea, the source. Someone who started it, who founded it, who's the first one to do it. The one who did it the best, right? That's faith. He's the source of faith. And then perfecter, we've talked about this a few other times, that to perfect something means to, in the Greek, teleos means to bring something to its completion or fulfillment, to finish it, right? Something that's perfect is finished. Like there's nothing more you need to do to it. It's perfect. It's finished. That's the idea. So he's the one that brings that. He's the source, but he's also the destination, let's say, of our faith. It's where it's going. It's completed in him. It's brought to its final fulfillment in him. And he says the originator and perfecter of our faith. And he says that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He's exhorting his hearers to look beyond their present difficulties to what lies ahead, God's promises. That Jesus showed that example of looking beyond his present circumstances when he endured the cross to what was coming, to why he was doing it. And he's exhorting his hearers, yeah, you need to do that too. You need to look beyond your present difficult circumstances to why you're going through all of this. There's a very good reason and a great promise at the end. He says that he endured the cross disregarding the shame. Disregard there in the original language is, as you would imagine, something that you treat it as if it has little value, little worth. He didn't treat the shame of the cross as that's not worth much. I don't care about that. I'm not going to consider that a lot of value. It's like he's scorning the scorn. He's scorning the shame, some translations say. So he says, yeah, that's of little value. That's insignificant. That's of no consequence, whatever I had to endure on the cross. Because for the joy set before him. And then the culmination, he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. I'll just remind you that's an allusion to Psalm 110:1, the most quoted psalm in the New Testament, most quoted Old Testament verses in the New Testament are Psalm 110, especially Psalm 110, verse 1. Referred to a lot in Hebrews and also by Peter and Paul and I think John and James. And so he's referring to that, but he's saying that to say that Jesus, as this forerunner, this pioneer, this founder, this champion who went before us and endured the cross and finished the race, that he's now completed it. So there may be hurdles along the way for us, but there aren't any roadblocks. Those have been cleared. There may be hurdles like difficult spots, things you got to navigate, but there's nothing that's stopping you. There's no walls. There's no roadblocks. Jesus has cleared all those out because he finished and he sat down at the right hand. So I just want to spend some time drawing out some things for us, 3 things for us from these verses. Sports physical therapists and coaches and kinetic specialists, they do this thing with runners where they adjust their gait or their stride. If you've ever done any running or been around that world, you know that you might be running a little weird, and that might cause your foot pain or hip pain, or you might be okay, but it's just not really efficient. You're spending a lot more energy for what you're getting. And people that are seriously competitive about it go to these kinetic specialists and sports physical therapists, and they analyze how they run, and they help them do this more, do that less, lean back, lean forward, raise your knees, whatever it is, so to kind of help prevent injury and to increase your efficiency. So, kind of extending this race metaphor, I want to give us 3 things to adjust your stride today from these verses. You guys still with me? All right. First of all, Hebrews 12:1-2 tells us that if we're going to run effectively, some things in life must be rejected. He says we should put aside the weight and the sin that so easily ensnares. That is telling us that to run effectively, there are things in life that need to be rejected. Not coddled, not, I'll give it the slow breakup. No, cut off. Imagine trying to run a race with a voluntarily, not because your drill sergeant told you to, but voluntarily running a race with a 50-pound pack on your back, and you're trying to be competitive, or with 3 foot of rope tied around your ankles. That's what this is talking about. There's things that are going to hinder you from being effective, and they need to be put aside. So even though we wouldn't do that in the physical voluntarily, we do in the spiritual. And sometimes we aren't aware of it, and that's fine. You don't know what you don't know. But after you know, after God reveals it to you, what are you doing? Are you going, well, but that's comfortable. Well, but that would, I'd have to bend down and untie the rope, and that's just, I don't feel like it. So I'm just going to keep hobbling here. Is there something that you need to throw off? Something that you need to set aside right now, today, to be able to run more effectively, to be able to live the Christian life more effectively? Something that is hindering. It could be sin. It could be something that's not sinful. This verse talks about both. And the sinful ones apply to all of us, right? Like we should all not do those. The other ones may apply to some of us and not all of us. Jesus might be saying something specific to you. Stop doing this, or stop doing this so much. Spend less time doing these things. Spend more time doing these other things. Whatever he is saying, is there something this morning that you need to set aside? Because if we're going to run effectively, some things need to be rejected. Second thing, the Christian life is difficult. And to do it effectively, to live it faithfully, it takes a sustained effort. He said, run with patient endurance. You're going to come through hardships, and it takes effort. It takes effort. Again, with the running metaphor, athletes that compete in endurance races, like marathons, like triathlon, Ironman stuff, right? Where you swim, 2 miles, and then you bike for 30 miles, and then you run for 10 miles or something, Only insane people would do. Athletes that compete in these types of events, they all talk about hitting the wall. Everybody knows about it. And if it's your first time competing in that event, you know about it. And if it's not your first time, then you've experienced it. Everybody knows. Everybody's preparing for it because they know it's coming. It's that moment in the competition where it feels like there is a wall in front of you, and you cannot. That's how your body feels. You cannot keep doing this junk. It's past. It's not just that you're physically your legs are tired and all that, but on top of that, there's some psychological component, and the only thing that gets you through that is just sheer mental strength to keep going, to keep putting one in front of the other. It's not that at that point, being physically fit doesn't matter. It's mental toughness that gets you through that. They all know about it. They're all preparing for it. They all know it's coming. They all purpose in their minds beforehand. When I get to that spot, I just need to keep doing it what I'm doing. I just need to say no to those thoughts. I just need to keep going. As my grandmother would have said, come hell or high water, we're going to the other side. And that's how they approach those races. So my question for you this morning is, are you facing the wall today? Have you hit the wall? and you feel like it's not. I know Jesus. I know what His Word says. I know all the things. But just that sheer endurance and patient endurance and perseverance to keep going is what you need. Something that will just propel you forward with that. And if you're not someone who's hit the wall this morning, are you preparing for when you hit the wall? Because if you haven't, the thing about the Christian walk is it's much longer than a marathon. So you're going to hit multiple walls. And so if you're not in one now, you should do like every good racer. You're preparing. Okay, what are the things that are going to sustain me, that are going to keep me going? What do I need to receive from God that's going to give me that endurance to keep going forward? Because Christian life is difficult, and it's going to take effort. And then lastly, to live faithfully for God, we need a healthy view of Christ, and I need a healthy relationship with Him. He said to fix our eyes on Jesus. We have to look to Him, not at our circumstances. We have to look to Him. The preacher of Hebrews spends the most time talking about this, and for good reason, because if you're really good and healthy in this, then the other two are a lot easier. You might even say they take care of themselves almost. You can hear God's voice, and you can reject things that are bad for you. You can understand that perseverance and endurance is something that He provides, and you can keep moving forward if in the first place you've fixed your eyes on Jesus. Because we're meant to replay His life in our lives, minus the saving the world bit. Everything else, right? The miracles, the trust, the self-sacrifice, right? He said, you'll do the works that I'm doing, and greater than these you will do. But it also includes persecution, suffering. He said the servants aren't greater than the master. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. But we're also meant to conquer in the end, just like He did. When He's writing to the church when Jesus is speaking through John the Revelator to the church at Laodicea, Revelations 3:21, He says, to the one who conquers, I will give to sit on my throne, just like I conquered and sat on my Father's throne. We're meant to conquer in the end. So we're meant to replay His life. So He's our example, right? So we need to look to Him. He's showing us how to live. But, He didn't just write it down and leave us to figure out the rest. Let's face it, that was written 2,000 years ago. A lot of things have changed. There's a lot of things that I deal with in day to day that Jesus didn't have to deal with, that Paul didn't have to deal with. Right? We can start naming them. They didn't have people cutting them off on the highway. There wasn't internet porn. Right? There's a lot of things that are different, but there's a lot of things that our core, the core issues aren't different. And he wrote what's written down is meant for us to meditate on, but through the Spirit, through relationship, He guides us through that. So fixing our eyes on Jesus, and it isn't just about reading what He did and looking at that example, but it's about internalizing and saying, okay, Holy Spirit, what is it you're saying to me today? That's where this relationship part comes in. What reservoir of faith, of trust will I draw on when that relationship seems to be strained by my circumstances? When I'm in a tough situation, because Christian life is difficult, then it might seem to strain that relationship with him, to us. And what reservoir of trust and faith will I be looking towards and drawing from to fix my eyes on him through those parts? This morning, do you need Jesus to birth faith in you for some situation, for some area or aspect of your life? Do you need him to bring your faith to completion, to fulfillment? You've been having faith, but it's been a long wait. Do you need a perspective adjustment so you can treat the sufferings of this present time as not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed, in Paul's words, for the joy set before him? He's able to do all these things. He's ready to do all these things, but you need to be looking to him. He's not a genie or Santa Claus God. It's just, okay, give me these things. Okay, thank you. Now go away. I got it from here. I'll call you next time I need something. Right? Do you have a healthy relationship, or are you distracted or hindered or entangled with something else? So once again, if we're to run effectively, some things in life must be rejected, number one. Number two, the Christian life is difficult, and therefore it takes a sustained effort. And three, to live faithfully for God, we need a healthy view of Christ and a healthy relationship with him. Is there something you need to set aside? Are you facing a wall, or are you preparing to face it? Do you need Jesus to birth faith, to complete faith in you?